Hello and welcome to the Model Minutes Safari Group Build Submission live stream. So as this is a live stream, do leave a little comment in the chat box and let us know what you think of each of these submissions. And I know there's a couple of people already in the chat, so it's great to see you guys. And if you're new here, please remember to subscribe and turn those notifications on so you don't miss any modeling content. But for now, I think it's probably time to get into this one. So we try and run a group build every 4 months or so over on our Discord server, and this particular one has now concluded, it's now finished, and we're going to go through all of the submissions. So let's have a look at what the theme of this submission was. So the theme being Safari is that there was the opportunity to build anything that had an animal name. So this could be a vehicle or machine which had an animal name assigned to it, or it could even be an actual animal model kit as well. So as long as you could build a model kit that fits within that theme, it was eligible to be submitted. And without any further ado, let's take a look at these submissions. And these are in no particular order. They are just in the order that they come up in the stream. So first up, we have an Academy 1/72nd scale Fiesler 156 Stoik or Storch. So cool because it looks like the long legs of a stork. So this 1/72nd scale kit is a German reconnaissance aircraft, and this individual here, you can see, has completed it in the green, and well, there's like 2 shades of green, and they've done a pretty good job of it. I do try and offer a little bit of constructive feedback for each build. So maybe I can see on your aircraft here, your decals are a little bit off center. So maybe just adding a little bit of extra time to even out the orientation, like that L, for example, is a little bit wonky, but I think with a little bit of practice, you'll get there. On the whole, though, this does look like you've done a pretty good job of this one. I do have a Fiesler Storch in the stash somewhere, but I'll get around to it at some point, no doubt. But this is a really good submission to start with. We're going to move on to something a little bit different. And this is a vintage classic from Airfix, RAF Rescue Launch. The reason why this one has been put in the group build is because it was commonly known as a whaleback. They say the build was surprisingly easy. It was a 1978 tooling, so not the oldest that they've had in the vintage classics range. And the only parts that didn't have good fit were the windows along the sides of the vessel, but they managed to overcome that. They say the detail isn't up to modern standards, but it would be a kit that they would recommend to anyone who's done some kits before. They like the look of the yellow wheelhouse and the red and white checker pattern because it adds a bit more visual interest. The kit does come with the checker pattern as a decal, but this person decided to mask and paint it instead for a neater result. They say this is the first ship they've done rigging on, and one of the first times using elastic rigging to do that, and I think it turned out pretty well. And I would agree with you, this does look very good. I think your painting is very neat. The decal application on the whole is pretty nice, and maybe a little point for improvement. I know it's difficult to do, that 127 on the bottom. It looks like there might be a little bit of silvering on the decal film there. Sometimes a gloss varnish can help. Obviously, it's a bit controversial because you don't need a gloss varnish necessarily. I don't always use a gloss varnish myself, but it can help give you a nice smooth surface before you put your decals down. But on the whole, very impressive build. I love the way this one looks. I would like to do one of these perhaps in the future, but again, so many projects, so little time. Next one then, we have actual animals. These are the war elephants, 3rd to 1st, I think it says 3rd to 1st century BC by Zvezda in 1/72nd scale. They say this is the 3rd time they've built this kit. They say it's one of the best subjects from this company, but there are a couple of flaws despite this. They say the plastic is a little bit, it's like almost like a vinyl by the sounds of it. It doesn't quite let cement stick to it. It's a bit more flexible, and that results in glue not really bonding to it and paint being a bit difficult to stick to. They also didn't like the mono poses of all of the bits, so you can't mix and match, you can't modify it without obviously cutting and replacing parts. The figures are pretty much how they come. They say the elephant with the raised legs, so that'll be the one on the left, tends to fall over, so they decided they would make bases for them so that they would be stuck down and not fall over. They say the building was pretty straightforward, fairly easy. The elephants only come in 3 parts, and everything has positive keying, so it goes together well. They say the figures are quite well detailed, and they use super glue or epoxy to glue everything together. They said that it was a bit frustrating that there's not a decisive fact of which species of elephant is depicted. It seems to be a bit misleading, so it just seems to be more like a generic kind of elephant rather than a specific species. But on the whole, I think you've done a good job. They say this is meant to be for a war game, Age of Battles, and they painted it with Vallejo Italian Army painter paints, and the bases are made from scrap MDF. I like this. It definitely fits along the theme of the build. Maybe try and find a little point for improvement for each one. Struggling a little bit. These are quite small, so obviously zooming in makes little imperfections a little bit more noticeable. I think from a normal viewing distance, this looks absolutely wonderful. Yeah, so I like these. Good job. Well done. Let's move on. So we've got, I do hope you all can hear me. I presume you can all hear me, because someone's just left in the chat that there's, I'm sure I checked the settings. I'm just going to leave a message there. See if everyone is able to hear me, because normally people do drop a thumbs up to let me know, and I haven't just been talking to myself. They said yes, good. Fantastic. This is a German weasel, and it's from Revell. They say it's a very easy model to build, and the assembly took about 4 hours. The only complicated part was the left and right hull, which had to be connected by a flimsy middle part. After that, everything was super smooth, and everything fitted well, and it was quite funny to see comparisons to main battle tanks when you consider the small size of this one. So what they've done is they've put a 1/35 scale soldier next to it for a sense of scale. In real life, the tank can be transported and dropped into the battlefield by a CH-53 or an A400M, and this little small tankette can whiz around the battlefield up to 70 kilometers an hour. It can be armed with a heavy machine gun or rocket launcher. They said that they had a lot of fun with this one. Yeah, I think this is a pretty cool build. It's very small, very interesting. One small thing for improvement maybe would be with just making sure your photos are in a little bit more focus. I struggle to get my photos in focus all the time, and it can be a challenge. So maybe moving forwards, and this is the thing, we do have some guidance on the server to allow people to, you know, kind of figure out how to display their photos. So I think a little bit more focus and a little bit more color balance would definitely bring out the paint scheme that you apply to this one. But on the whole, very nice job indeed. Let's move on to another vehicle. This is a Tamiya 1/35 scale Panther A. They say it was an easy kit to build. It was a little bit inaccurate though, so this was considered a practice piece for their skills. They did some airbrushing and they freehand it, which I think you've done a good job of. It's quite neat, the airbrushing you've applied there. They also tried out some mud effects and some panel lining. They say the panel line didn't quite work out as they'd planned or as they'd hoped. Yeah, I suppose the panel lining isn't as noticeable. Normally you would see more contrast and shade. It might have been a bit too thin, but on the whole, they say it was a nice kit to practice on and try out new things. So naturally, this being a panther, that's a large cat. Yep, I think you've done a good job. I think these Tamiya kits are good value for money, fairly easy to build. I am not really much of a tank expert, but I like what you've done with the subtle weathering there. Let's move on to an aircraft now. This is an Airfix 1/72 scale RAF Red Arrows Hawk. This is an older kit from Airfix, but was still an enjoyable build, and the person had a lot of fun building it. This aircraft in particular is X-Ray 177, which is Red One's aircraft, and they did say that they would highly recommend this kit to anyone who wants a nice little Hawk. I presume when they say that this is a older kit, they meant it was the old tooling, because there was a new tooling and then there wasn't even a newer tooling, so I think it's probably more like the middle tooling, because it looks like it's got recessed panel lines in there. I would say maybe the smallest point for improvement would be just around the canopy. It almost looks like the primer has shown through on the upper surface, and I think with a little, just another layer of paint would have hidden that one. But your red paint is nice and smooth, which if you used the starter set, like paint set, it can be pretty pretty horrible to use, the gloss 19 that they include in that. So yeah, I think you did a good job of painting that one on the whole. Let's move on. This is a Dream Model 1/72 scale AH1Z Viper, Viper being a venomous snake. It is an upgrade from a Super Cobra, another kind of snake. When an attack helicopter named after a venomous snake needs an upgrade, it's named after an even more venomous snake, apparently. They say the kit is decent, but there were some fit issues, a little bit of flash here and there, and there was a bit of a misalignment on one side of the engine. The decals, though, were surprisingly good, and they enjoyed putting the shark teeth on. There is a bit of photo etch included in this kit as well, which they found very nice indeed, and the details and the instructions are a little bit simplified. So there's only 2 sprues in a single page. Perhaps a little bit more information in the instructions would have been beneficial. They do say there were some inaccuracies present on the kit. For example, on the right side, the access door doesn't exist in real life and only exists on the left. So they've done a bit of mirroring by the sounds of it for ease of manufacture. So they say, in conclusion, it is a good kit to build, but there are a few little inaccuracies. I think you've done a good job of this one. I really like the sort of subtle weathering. I think at the back there where the engine exhausts have come out, you can see the sort of staining across the body of the aircraft there. Yeah, I think you've done a really good job. I would struggle to find anything to suggest as an improvement here. So with that, well done. Thanks for taking part. Let's move on to another submission. This is a Trumpeter AN2 colt, a colt being a horse, and this one in particular is a colt that can go on the water because it's got floats. This is in 1/72 scale, and they say they started with the cockpit, which was not very detailed, so they did scratch build some stuff to go in there. The transport area towards the back was just empty as well, so they did add a floor for that because you can see that through the windows. During the assembly, they said it was okay. The wings are a little bit complicated to put on, which I imagine, biplanes can be a bit tricky to do. But they do say the float put up a bit of a challenge. They kept falling off whilst they were building the kit. I've had that happen with other projects as well, and it is a right pain when something keeps falling off. They do say they airbrushed some black primer on and a little bit of pre-shading, but they don't think it's very visible. I think it is visible. I think it's just enough. The pre-shading that you've done, sometimes you don't want it to be too overbearing, and I think the level of pre-shading you've done here is good to give like a 3-dimensional effect to the aircraft. They used Revell acrylic for a varnish on the top and then applied the decals. They say the decals were quite good. They applied to the surface well, and then they varnished once again and put a little bit of weathering on. They wanted to do it in a dark brown panel line, but when that was removed, it became very thin, and I think maybe they thought it was going to be a little bit thicker, but actually I would say you've got it about right. You don't necessarily always want the weathering that you apply to be too like overpowering. I think your paintwork here is really good. They say it was an interesting kit and it was okay for the price that they paid for it. Yeah, on the whole, I think you've done a really good job of this one. Perhaps, I don't know if you painted the canopy separately and then added it at the end. Maybe putting a black primer on the canopy first and then doing your green might have made that have a little bit more weight, because the rest of the aircraft has a lot of like weight to it. It's more 3-dimensional, and then the canopy framework looks just a little bit washed out color wise, if that makes sense. So I think maybe that could have helped, but on the whole I really like what you've done here. So thanks for sending that one in, and we now move back to a vehicle. So this is an AVGP Cougar from Trumpeter in 1/35 scale. They say the build was pretty decent. Some details are missing though, and they had to do a bit of filling. So they had to do a bit of detail work and a little bit of filling. They say the painting was pretty fun. They played a little bit with post shading and oils, and they used these oils to tone down some shading as well. Some extra weathering was done with pigments. They used some enamel products, and leaves are from AK, which they originally bought for dioramas and vignettes, but naturally you can use them for camouflage as well. They say it's their 2.5 model where they used pigments, and they think they've improved since their previous projects as well. They say it was a fun build, although it did start to become a little bit tedious towards the end. Do you know what? I think you've done a good job. I like this one. I like the extra camouflaging you've done on there. I'm not particularly expert in vehicles. I think what you've done there looks fantastic. So well done. Thanks very much for sharing that. Let's move on to another vehicle. There we go. We have a Tamiya 1/35 scale Pink Panther SAS Jeep. Pink Panther, of course, being an animal. This one they've called Passing Through. So this features the Tamiya Jeep, and also you can see, I think it's the Land Rover over there as well. So they made a little diorama out of them. They say it built it straight from the box using a photo frame and cement base. Great little model, had no issues building it, although they did drop the whole thing just before they finished it. There was only one scheme available, but there's always a little we can do to adapt the finished model to add a few extra touches, which, yeah, you've done a good job. I like that. I like the particularly like dirty and worn look of this one. I like that you've paired it with another vehicle. It's in a desert setting. Yeah, this is really nice. This is really, really good diorama, and I'd like to see more dioramas in the future. So well done. Let's move on to an aircraft now. He says, if it would move forwards. There we go. This is an Italeri 1/72 scale Jaguar. This is the GR3 in the Big Cat paint scheme, so very appropriate. It was also known as Spotty. So this is X-Ray 119 of 6th Squadron at RAF Coningsby in 2007. And they say the tooling isn't the best. Apparently it's a pretty old tooling from 1996, but it had this part was released, this kit was released in 2014. The decals were the biggest issue of the kit. They struggled with them folding over, and they were difficult to apply. I can imagine, because there's a lot of decals there to put on. All of that tiger element are the decals, so they tried to fix everything down by doing microcell, and some bits needed to be trimmed as well around the air intakes. And this is the problem I find with Italeri kits, is that they're good in like concept, but they're not always necessarily good in application. So it looks like the decals have been a bit of a problem here. For the painting, they used AK RAF Dark Camouflage Grey, Vallejo Aluminium and Vallejo Black, and the Set and Sol did work to help soften the transfers into the surface. As a small point, I would just say keep an eye out for your decals on here, especially with the fact you've got so many of them, is that I can see a few places just peeling a little bit. So just be super careful and make sure you get your setting solutions in there to really soften them into the model. You did say that you did use a varnish over the top, which will help seal them in, but of course with a little bit of peeling in a few places, a little bit more varnish will really help to like almost glue it onto the surface. Other issues they said were with the landing gear. One of the, they say, pegs to go into the aircraft, so where it locates inside of the aircraft, snapped off, so that's effectively going to render it like flush, and then you're going to have to glue it in like on as a butt joint, which is real pain. I feel you. I've had that happen before. So they did a little bit of rework as well, because they had lost the pitot tube and had to make one. Or they sort of borrowed it off of they say they borrowed it off a Has a Go at English Electric Lightning. So, you know, we overcome, don't we? We adapt and overcome. I really like what you've done with this one. I like the way this one looks. I've already pointed out a small point for improvement. So yeah, well done. Thanks for sending it in. Let's move on to a F-16. This is the Italeri, bit of an Italeri themed group build, this one. 1/48 scale F-16 Viper. Viper being a kind of snake. They say that this was a fun build. It would be impossible without filler though, because there were many gaps. Details had to be like added in a few places. Cockpit decals were not provided, but there are lots of buttons and things inside the cockpit which you can pick out with paint. The decal application was fairly straightforward, they say. They did have a little split in one of the decals on the walkway, but I don't think I would notice that if you hadn't have pointed it out. It is an older tooling. They say for an older tooling, it wasn't like a bad project to work on. I think Your weathering is very heavy. Obviously, I know weathering is a completely personal, down to the individual modeler. I prefer my weathering to be a little bit lighter, but if that's a look you were going for, I think, you know, where it is around the gun, you can see obviously this is being used. Maybe they've been using it in a training mission, so it gives quite an effective result. So yeah, well done. Let's move on from a 1/48 scale to something a little bit smaller. This is an Eduard P51 Mustang in 144th scale. Not much information about this one, unfortunately, but they do say that it was a really cool little kit. They enjoyed building it, and everything went together really nicely. They did scratch build some parts in the interior, which I find insane because this is 144th scale and you would never see it anyway, but you know, people like to do these kind of things. They did have to add an antenna as well, and they do say that they would recommend this kit. It does look really good. It's a nice little tiny little model of a P51, Mustang of course being a kind of horse. I think, again, because it's such a small scale, photographs can be a little bit harsh on it. Yeah, I would say you've done a really good job here. There's not much I would find to suggest for improvement in the future, given the small scale of this particular kit. So let's move on. We have a Twin Otter. This is the Revell 1/72nd scale one, and it was originally a Matchbox tooling. They said they had this one in the stash for a few years because other stuff had got in the way. And they had heard it had some problems, and you know that puts you off, doesn't it? I have the same. I've got the Twin Otter. I've got this kit to build. It's sitting on my shelf, and I, you know, because there are bits that you go, oh, I'm not sure I really want to do that. Obviously, for this group build, it was very fitting. The build, they say, went pretty smoothly. They used some filler for the roof and the cockpit windows, and then there was a lot of sanding. So they sprayed the whole thing yellow with a rattle can, which is probably what I would do as well. It's a fairly straightforward way of doing it. And painted the details with Revell and Vallejo water-based paint. They say it's not perfect, but they're generally quite happy with the results. I think you've done a good job. Your black lines just on the leading edges of the wings, I presume you've used tape there, but the maybe there's been a little bit of bleed, which is a little bit noticeable, but you know, that's an improvement for the future. On the whole, it looks really good. If I get mine to look anything like this when I come to build mine, I will be pretty happy with it. So yeah, well done. Let's move on to the next one. It's nice to see that we've got 35 people currently watching. We've had quite a few people drop in. Appalling Models is here. Xenomorph is here. Fenris is here. Mr. Ed, welcome. Mr. Ed is a new Model Club member, so thanks for joining us. Flippy Rock is here. So thanks so much, everyone, for dropping in. I know this one was a bit short notice today, but hopefully you all enjoy. This is a S model Daimler Dingo in 1/72nd scale. So I bet this is tiny, actually, because it looks like a pretty small armoured car. They say it was a quick build. It took about 4 days from start to finish. There was no real fit issues. It basically fell together. The only parts that gave them trouble were the tiny photo etch parts. So this comes with photo etch, which are above the front wheel arches and the thin part above the engine at the back, due to how small and fiddly they were, I can imagine. This one is depicted as a 1st Armoured Division Dingo that presumably served in France in 1940, but they say there was no information given with the particular schemes. Like all S-model kits, this actually gives you enough parts to make 2 if you wanted to. I like this. It's really nice. It's a really nice clean build. I presume it's tiny. Perhaps a little bit of weathering, but again, that's subjective, isn't it? That's down to personal choice. I like this. I think it's a nice looking kit. So yeah, well done. It would be nice perhaps to have something to compare it to size with, maybe a coin or something, just so we know how small it is, because I imagine it's tiny. Let's move on to another vehicle. Vehicles are quite popular. This is an LGS Fennec by Trumpeter. As with many Trumpeter models, the exterior details were generally crisp, but some of the interior was spare and had a number of ejector marks on, which had to be sorted out. They had to work around these problems and the absent details. They had to add some extra details so that the vehicle could have the doors displayed open. The other feature of Trumpeter strikes you as limited black and white instructions, so you had to be taking care when you're reading the instructions to actually get things in the right places. And although alignment pins are provided, they found that by using a couple of them in a few places, actually the alignment was worse, so they removed the pins to get a better fit. They did do some modifications, but not a lot. They added an enhanced driving position and storage, fully detailed the door interiors, opened the commander's hatch, and added in-scale towing hooks. Painting was mainly done via airbrush with Vallejo, whilst the weathering is a bit of a mix of Vallejo and AK enamels along with some oils. The vignette base is wood with a lot of texturing and tufting. All of this was airbrushed and then brought back up with dry brushing and oils. It took a bit longer than they intended. They said they had mission creep, so they started doing this and then something else came up and they did something else to the model and then a little bit more. So a simple kit that you made more complicated because you couldn't leave it alone. But do you know what? Actually, the extra time and effort that you put into this definitely shows. It's definitely elevated and what you sort of in your words, it's a little bit simple, not much detail, and you've just kind of added loads so you can have the doors open. So yeah, I think this is a really good job. There's nothing really I could suggest for improvement because it's probably much better than I could do. So yeah, well done. Let's move on. If it will move forwards, which it will. We're seeing another F-16. This is the Tamiya F-16 in 1/48 scale. This is a Fighting Falcon. There were some minor fitting issues with the landing gear on this one, but they say that it could have been builder's error. They would build this again, and they would recommend it for anyone to have a go at. The best part was fitting all of the big pieces together, such as the wings, fuselage, and stabilizer. They say if they gave it a score, it would be a 9 out of 10. Definitely would get another one. I like this. I think you've done a good job. Maybe a little bit of improvement could be to add a little bit more... I almost want to say like weathering or shading or something, just because I know aircraft like this just are overall grey, and it's a strange one, isn't it? Because a lot of modern aircraft are grey these days, but they do have subtleties which make them look more like they have more weight to them. There's more depth to the paint, and that's something that I strive to look for when I build my models, and I am improving on that myself. So I understand if you just want to do it in a single color, that's absolutely fine. But as I'm progressing in my journey, I'm finding where you can add more depth to it to make it look a little bit more weighty, a little bit more three-dimensional. So maybe that's something we could do together. But yeah, no, good build. I like this. Let's move on. And it would not be a group build. It wouldn't be on my server if I didn't take part, I suppose. So this is my submission. There is already a build video out on this, so I won't linger too long on this particular submission, but this is the Academy P40B/C Warhawk in 1/72 scale. So a hawk is a type of predatory bird, and in this case it's extra scary because it's going to war. Of course, this is an aircraft depicting a unit called the Flying Tigers, so I've got a trifactor there of animal theme. This is an old tooling from 1987. It's supposedly based off of an older frog tooling, which means it's fairly crude, quite simple, dimensionally questionable. There's a lot of inaccuracies. The kit was fairly simple and fairly pleasant to build. It's just not a particularly good model. On the bottom right there, you can see that they included a bomb. Apparently it sits a bit too far backwards, which means that it impacts the floor and raises the tail wheel off the ground. So it's not particularly well designed. It's not accurate, but for having a practice at freehand camouflage, it was good. Decals generally went on okay, but there are lots of problems with this kit. It's not the best kit out there, but it was okay to build, and I think that's a lot of the things, isn't it? That's sort of what we like. If I was going to suggest any improvements for myself, perhaps fixing some of the inaccuracies with the kit, giving the wings dihedral, maybe replacing the pitot tube on the wing because it's just a little stub, maybe rescribing some of the panel lines. These are things that could be improved to it, but it's a cheap kit, and actually for the money I'd probably just go out and get a more recently tooled version and work with that rather than what we had here. So that's my build. Let's move on to another P40, because who doesn't love a P40? This is the Academy 1/72 scale P40M. This is a Warhawk with a shark mouth, so we've got extra animal relatedness there. This aircraft here, they say that the P40 was generally considered to be a little bit outdated by the start of the war, but they naturally upgraded it over time. This aircraft is painted in the 74th Fighter Squadron operating in China in 1944. And the model is from Academy in 1/72. It is a 2020s release, but it was from a tooling from the 90s. Panel lines, they say, were a bit shallow. The details could be a bit more engraved. This is effectively like the one I've just done was an Academy P40B, and this is a later version which they designed and tooled, to be a bit better. Landing gear doors were tricky. Definitely I can relate to that because they are small. They took 9 days to finish this one, just to make it in time for the group build deadline. They brush painted it with enamels, which we always like. We like a bit of the old-fashioned getting a brush on to your model with some enamel paint. I've done a project recently using enamels, and it can be a little bit tricky, but the benefit with enamels is that the long drying time lets the paint level out and make it look smoother. However, the long drying time means that you can't make quick progress. They struggled a little bit with the decals because they were a bit thin and wanted to fold over on themselves. And they did try some weathering, as you can see. This is their first time doing weathering this heavy. Although they like the look of it, they think that there could be improvement. And yeah, I would say definitely the weathering is the area which needs a bit more improvement. I can see you've done like chipping to replicate paintwork coming off, and you've done smoke staining. Maybe it is a bit heavy in a few places, and definitely it's something that even now I'm still trying to develop in my own skills. So yeah, good. I like a P40. I like what you've done here. Let's move on. And guess what we're going to move on to? It's a P40. This is a P40N5 from Special Hobby. This is dioramas, and it's in 1/72 scale. This is another Warhawk, which this person said they had great fun building. This is an out-of-the-box build, no additional parts. They say the fit was good, no filler was used, and a little bit of sanding had to be done on some edges to remove the sprue gates. They would build one of these kits again, and if it is a nice kit, I might consider getting one for myself to have a go at. Weathering was done with an airbrush and oils, and for their presentation they wanted to build their first ever diorama. So this is their first go at doing a diorama. So they've got a picture frame base and a 3D printed palm tree and individual Marston mats. They were used then, Marston mats are these metallic sort of sheets that were used to prepare the ground as an airfield. Most of the weathering was done with an airbrush, but they added some dry brushing and acrylic and oil washes, and then a 3D printed tropical pilot painted suitably was added into the scene. They're happy with the result. The kit was fun to build. Diorama came out better than they hoped for, and they enjoyed their group build experience. I like this. This is really nice. No bias at all. I like what you've done with the panel work on the aircraft there. You can see like different shades of the upper surface color, which I like. It's nice. It's modulation. This aircraft has weight to it. Yeah, I don't know. Don't know if I could suggest any improvements. If you can think of anything that this person could work on, please let them know in the comments. But I really like it. So well done. This is a JH7A Fly Big Leopard from, or Flying, sorry, that's a typo. Flying Leopard from Trumpeter in 1/72 scale. To be honest, they say it was a bit of a mixed bag. The build wasn't bad, but was actually quite enjoyable. Panel lines are a bit shallow. The cockpit has a lack of detail, and the painting instructions weren't fantastic in that area. And I'm just checking the notes here, just bear with me a second. So what happens is when people submit these things, they leave me some notes to read through, and some people tend to go off on a tangent, so I'm just checking to make sure what they've said is coherent. They did have some plastic fogging. They did use Clearfix. Now, I've done this in the past. I've used things like Clearfix to glue in cockpit canopies, but there's something inside which is not quite dry yet, like some paint, some enamel paint or super glue or something, and that's still off-gassing, and that's how you end up with fogging canopies sometimes, even if you haven't used that to glue it on. Decals were not great. They say there was a bit of a registration issue, and I think I can see that on the wings. The yellow outline is off to one side, which is a bit disappointing. They did put it to one side sort of as a result, but they did eventually come back to this project to complete it in time for the group build. Put a varnish coat down. but they became, you know, a little bit bored and tired of it. So they decided that this is as far as they're going to go, which is fine. I think you've done a good job. It's in a nice, clean condition. I think the decals are a little bit disappointing. You would like to have better quality ones, which are actually, the registration is central, which does detract ever so slightly from the look of the kit, but that's not your fault. That's the fault of the manufacturer. Yeah, I think good job. Well done. Again, this is like an overall grey, and that's the thing with grey aircraft, is that they can look a bit almost like smooth and a bit too clean. Maybe a little wash would have helped with the panel lines, but you know, on the whole, it's a nice clean build. I like it. Well done. We're going to move on to one in a bit more of a dynamic pose. This is a Mini Hobby Models F111E Aardvark. This is in 144th scale, and they say the kit was never designed to look good, but I think you have made it look good. They bought it for about $3 or £2.25, and they wanted a simple kit to have a go at. They say the kit itself felt quite good. Plastic's a bit thick, but there's not many plastic parts. There is a bit of a gap between where the cockpit and the fuselage join, so that you can probably see there's a little bit of filler in that area, but I think you've done quite a good job to hide that. They did have a trouble with some of the parts breaking on them, such as the pitot tube and the swing wing mechanism. So it can be a bit tricky, this one. They persevered and they finished it. Generally, they're happy with the results. I did a bit of DIY fixing the different bits and pieces. The intake needed a little bit of sanding to get it to look right, but they are happy with the results. I like this. I think you've done a good job of this. If you hadn't told me that this kit had problems, I wouldn't have known. It is small. It's a small scale kit. Again, you know, zooming in, you're going to see some imperfections because you've zoomed in to look at the model. I think you've done a good job. Paint scheme is reasonably neat and tidy, a little bit of subtle weathering in there, and you fixed some of the problems that you had. So yeah, well done. I could be tempted to get one of these, but I probably shouldn't. And that's purely based off of someone else building the kit. It makes you want to go and buy it, doesn't it? Treners has left a message in the chat there saying the GR1 is haunting you. Yes, the GR1 with the fogged canopy is indeed haunting me. Don't let super glue sit inside the canopy and off gas, because it will fog it up. This is an FA18F Super Hornet. This is 1/72nd scale from Hasegawa, and it's finished in the VFA 102 diamond backed paint scheme. This is their third time building a kit of this type. It's a pretty solid kit, they say, and it goes together pretty well. The only issue they had was fitting the aftermarket intakes, as they wouldn't fit properly. So they've got aftermarket intakes there. Decals were nice, went on without any problems. And they've gone with this 50th anniversary scheme to add more colour. And also, there's a snake on the tail. This is very impressive. I like this. You've done a good job. You can see you've got your flaps like drooping down. You say you added extra intakes, which make it look a little bit more sort of realistic. The decal work is good. Weathering is really nice. This is a really good build. I would struggle to find a suggestion for improvement here, because I certainly couldn't do any better, that's for sure. So well done. Let's move on. This is a Hobby Boss KA50 Hokum or Black Shark in 1/72nd scale. Only a handful of these particular aircraft were built. They were never widely deployed in combat. The successor to this, the KA-52, was more advanced and therefore took on more of the workload. They say the kit went together pretty well. Fit was good. Parts have good detail. On their molds in particular, though, some of the recessed detailing was a little shallow, but it was workable. This kit has a bi-colour camouflage livery and a demonstration black livery. I think we can tell which one they went for. They went for the camouflage one. It is a little bit more visually interesting, which is probably the better of the two choices. Now here's the thing. They say that they brush painted the kit using a custom mix of Vallejo model and colour acrylics, but I wouldn't have known that you brush paint it because this painting is nice and smooth. Weathering was done with Tamiya panel liner and some pastels, which looks good. It's not overly like in your face. It's a little bit muted, but it gives that extra three-dimensional effect to the aircraft. They say there were no issues with the kit, quite an enjoyable build, and a pretty solid option if you want an aircraft of this type in this scale. yeah, I think you've done a good job. Helicopters are not really my thing. I don't know, I just find them a little bit complicated. So I think you've done a good job of this one. Well done. Thanks for sending it in. Let's move on to a ground vehicle now. This is a Chevrolet Impala in 1/25th scale from AMT. They say the kit went together fairly well. Say the provided instructions do leave a bit to be desired, and not necessarily as good as they could be. They did apply a original body color to this, but it didn't look how they wanted it to, so they pivoted to a lighter purple. They say that it looks good. They're pretty happy with it. It gives that sort of futuristic 1960s feel that they were going for. They say they have a drying booth, which they were thankful for because it helps speed up the drying, and super glue accelerator because they wouldn't have finished on time if they didn't use these things. And that's the thing. We do normally give you about 4 months for the group build, but you know, I haven't even started my one for the current one, and time gets away from you sometimes. Aftermarket license plate decals were added, and they added some accents in a chroma pen. They say that this was a fun build and they enjoyed working on this project. I like this. It's a good build. You can see that you can take the bonnet off, or the hood, and show the engine details, which is nice. Perhaps the interior, because it's all like a cream color, maybe a little like a very light wash in a slightly darker color would have helped raise some of those details and make them look a little bit more textured. But other than that, I think this is a really nice, it's a nice clean build. So yeah, well done. Moving on to an aircraft. A Mosquito. This is a 109 Squadron Pathfinder Mosquito, which was affectionately named the Grim Reaper. This is the Tamiya 1/48 scale B Mark IV kit, and they've gone for ocean grey and dark green on the upper, and a night colour, or black on the bottom. They painted over the nose glazing, which was typical from reference photos that they had viewed. All the paints were a custom mix of ICM. And inside the cockpit, they used a mix of grey-green to represent the interior, and they highlighted all the little radios and things. The landing gear was aluminium. They did a clay wash and pigments to add extra dirt and grime. Exhausts were glazed with metal colour steel, and they used some burnt umber and black as the base colour. There are some classic Mosquito soot plumes in thin transparent layers, starting with a warm brown black and then a soft grey. These were then blended into the night finish on the side and lower surfaces to achieve a seamless effect. Panel lines have a dark grey wash on the top and then a browner mix underneath. And some oils and AK pencils added some extra detail to the different fasteners and things. This is a really nice kit. I think you've done a good job. I like the paintwork. You've added aerials and things as well. Yeah, this is a really nice build. I've heard that the Tamiya Mosquito is a good kit to work on, and obviously you've added a lot of work into the painting of this to give it that three-dimensional effect. So yeah, well done. Let's have a look here. This is a Hasegawa 1/72 scale UH-60 Black Hawk. The Sikorsky UH-60A Black Hawk, which was modified to be more like an MH-60 of the 160th SOAR. Some heavy inspiration from a particular movie to make this representation. Let's say it's an older kit from Hasegawa. The details are a bit simple, but there are enough to show that it is a Black Hawk. It's a bit gappy, there are seam lines, and these things had to be addressed. The kit was mostly brush painted, but the body was spray painted black. After the kit was mostly constructed, they gave it a heavy dry brushing of dark gunship grey. They're quite happy with how it's turned out. The soldier came and was painted in 1990s Gulf War chocolate chip uniform. No sensors and extra antenna were made from paper, and thin wire was used for the antenna on the lower tail of the helicopter. They do say the decals were very thick and had to trim some of them down so that they can fit where they needed to go. They do say they enjoyed building this one and they're happy with how it turned out. I think you should be happy with how it turned out. It looks pretty good. It can be quite difficult sometimes to make something that's just generally one color look visually interesting, but I think you've done that. I like that you've got your door open, you've got your sort of soldier figure sitting there in the doorway. Yeah, I think you've done a good job of this one, so well done. We're going to go on to another diorama now. This is a 1/72 scale Special Navy Beaver German midget submarine. I love this one. This was what was on the thumbnail. This has a lot of depth to it. So, armed with 2 externally mounted torpedoes or mines, these were intended to attack coastal shipping. These are the smallest, or among the smallest, submarines in the Kriegsmarine. And in this diorama, it's been delivered by trailer to the naval base, ready to be deployed. This is around 1944, and 2 officers are discussing how the submarine is going to make its next attack, while an engineer round the back is taking a smoke break. They say the kit is crisply moulded. There's lots of detail. The trailer with all of its framework was a nice little challenge. The dock section was built up from 3 layers of AK interactive carving foam. They did some sanding and carved the masonry and brickwork textures with a little tool. Painting the elements was a procedure of starting with the darker tones and ending with the lighter ones. The 3 figures come from White Stork Miniatures. The crates and barrels are from other brands. And the water was created by painting a dark blue base layer and adding some MIG water gel to create the waves. The foam was realised with a little bit of white cotton suitably painted. I like it. It's just a really good little diorama. The kit itself blends in like seamlessly with the scene. There's figures which give it life and movement. You've got waves. You've got almost like the moss effect around all the different brickwork, which is quite typical of things, you know, by the sea. It's a really nice build. I like this one. It's really good. Well done. Could not fault it. Let's move on to another beaver. This, however, is the DHC-2 in 1/72 scale from Airfix. This has been done as a civilian float plane in their own custom livery, inspired by real civilian beavers that have existed. As it's an older kit, its detail is lacking. It's on par for Airfix's vintage classics, but obviously not up to their current standards. They say the build was fairly straightforward, but there are a couple of issues, such as the supports for the pontoons being a bit of a problem to line up, a bit fiddly to do. They found masking the windows a bit of a pain too. They do have some odd shapes, I can see that from here. The gap between the windscreen and the roof or wing, yes, you can see a small gap there, which is a bit frustrating. And they also say they didn't think ahead with the paint scheme. Right, so they wanted to use the identification numbers or registration numbers, but they're decals that come in the kit, but they're white, and obviously they've used white as their base color, so they couldn't use those decals, so they had to paint that on, which obviously can be a right pain. I think they're implying that they did the paintwork, like the registration numbers and the stripes and things, all by hand. They've not used any tape, which at first glance you'd thought they had used tape, but actually now you look a bit closer, you can see that it's a little bit wavy. So well done for trying to do that by hand. But I think if you had some tape, definitely that could have made it a lot like easier for you, and perhaps a little bit less wibbly wobbly in a few places. But on the whole, I really like what you've done here. So well done. Let's move on. We have a Strike Eagle. This is the F-15E from Academy in 1/48 scale. Excuse me whilst I just take a sip. I'll be right with you in a sec. All this talking, I've been talking for nearly an hour now. Mouth gets a bit dry. So the kit for this one, they say, went together quite smoothly. They said that was quite surprising for 1989 Academy tooling. The cockpit was quite nicely detailed, and they had a nice time painting it. The landing gear and gear bays are a little bit less detailed, but they did some scratch building. Personally, I probably wouldn't have bothered with the landing gear bays, because from this angle you can't really see into them. But, you know, I know that some people enjoy that process. The wings and air intakes needed some sanding, but nothing too serious, and they painted this kit with the classic single-tone camouflage and hand-painted the nose art. That's very impressive. The decals were the worst part of the kit. Every single one silvered, which is a bit of a shame. Probably, yeah, you can see in a few places on the images that there are some silvering, which is annoying. To finish it off, they designed and resin printed intake covers and the boarding ladder, which is really cool. They added a display with the pilots and armament, which it can carry. And they say overall it's a good build, but there are some disappointment about the decals. And I think that's the only real problem with this one. You've done a wonderful paint job. You've added extra details. You've made a little display base for it. And then sometimes the kit just, doesn't have the right... the decals are just no good. Sometimes, I know obviously a lot of people say, you don't need a gloss to go on or you use this setting solution or whatever. But sometimes it is just the decals. If they're too thick and too papery, you're going to struggle with them. And that's probably what's happened in this particular instance. Sometimes it does come down to the quality of the transfers. But yeah, no, really impressive build nonetheless. Let's move on. This is a mini hobby model 144th scale Saab JAS 39 Gripen. I say this was a Revell tooling originally from the 90s, but this is a mini hobby model reboxing. And they say it shows in the look and shape of the overall kit. Some work had to be done. The nose cone didn't fit correctly. The intakes have like a step instead of a smooth line, so they had to sort that out. The landing gear is a bit chunky. They've got no locating pins either, which is a problem. Landing gear doors also a bit thick. And if you use the locating pin for the tail, it sits too far forwards. So they had to modify that to push it a little bit further back. Actually, they say they didn't bother to fix the tail because they probably wouldn't have bothered with it. They probably just would have thrown it in the bin. The kit originally came with weapons as well, but they've lost a pylon, so they decided to just go in a clean configuration, which isn't a bad choice. The paint scheme, they had the option to do a in-service two-tone grey, but they decided to go for this one, which is a prototype scheme with blue and yellow stripes, which is probably a bit more visually interesting. They say they like how it turned out. They forgot to account for the black letter on the tail. So when they applied the black decal onto the black paintwork, it just vanished. I wouldn't have known. I wouldn't have known if you had these issues. I think you did a good job of it. I like the way it looks. I like the interesting paint scheme. It's a small scale kit. I think you tried your best with what you had available to you. So yeah, good job. This is a Bulldog from KP in 1/72nd scale, and they've done it as a monoplane trainer aircraft. So the build was okay, but there is a seam on the back of the aircraft which was a bit of a pain. They didn't like that the sprues, the sprue gates were pretty big, but it doesn't sound like it was an expensive kit, so they're quite happy with what they paid for it. They airbrushed this using Vallejo and a mixture of Tamiya paints to create the grey and the orange. And then they did a little bit of post shading to modulate the grey paintwork on the wings, which is something I've been trying with a little bit recently too. I think you did a good job of that. That looks good. It looks convincing, I would say. They used Ammo MIG black blue panel wash, and they used some Vallejo silver for chipping. I think you've done a good job. I think the weathering on this looks quite convincing. I know naturally some people will say, oh, it's a trainer aircraft, they wouldn't let it get that worn, but actually, bit of modeler's license. I like the way you went with this one. They say they like the result, and I think you should be proud of it because it looks pretty good. Let's move on. This is a big one. This is a big kit. This is a 1/18 scale Hobby Boss AV8B/Harrier, Harrier being a kind of bird. The parts and building of this, they say, was okay. There are lots of cool gimmicks included. So like lights and things, I presume, are in this. You raise and lower the landing gear. They say painting was a problem due to the size. They're generally happy with the results. They did run out of time given the size of the aircraft, and they did break a few decals in a few places. They say that this kit is about a 5 out of 10 if they were going to give it a score. It's only good because of the gimmicks and its size, but they generally had a few problems with it. They say they're satisfied with their results though, and yeah, I think you should be happy. It's a big kit. it's something that you can put on your shelf. You've got something to talk about. It's a conversation piece. Maybe a little bit weathering, just to add a little bit more depth to it. But on the whole, actually looks really good. So well done. This is another aardvark, an F111 aardvark from Hobby 2000. So Hobby 2000 Rebox kits. This is originally a Hezegawa tooling. So there are some good details, they say, but there is a bit of a problematic fit in a few places. They use some Hasegawa weapon sets to get 36 bombs on there. They were going to go for 48, but, you know, they lost 6, so they had to go for 36. Fitting the bombs themselves onto the ejectorats was horrible. There was no real solid place for them to fit, and you had to do it 36 times, which I can imagine would be a right pain. But they say they like the look of the aardvark with a full belly. Although, actually, it's more the wings that are full, isn't it? Really impressive. Paintwork is fantastic. Excellent shading on there. Very nice and clean in the sense of, you know, colours are where they need to be, but obviously you've added weathering, so it's not a clean plane. It has that depth. It's that depth I was talking about earlier on, that three-dimensional weight to the aircraft. I don't envy you doing the bombs. I probably wouldn't have bothered, personally. I would have just gone, which is there a loadout which has the least amount of work, and picked that one because I'm a bit lazy. But you put the extra work in. It looks amazing. Well done. So here is a Westland Lynx Mark 88 from Revell in 1/72 scale. Lynx being a kind of cat. This is from a frigate in Mallorca in April 1986. They say the build was okay. There's not many parts or steps, but there was a lot of flash. They decided they wanted the doors open, so there's a bit of modification to allow this. Paint scheme was pretty simple, matte dark grey on most of the model, and a very light grey on the bottom. There's a little diorama. They say that was quite fun. They've never done one of these before, so they used cardboard as the base to represent concrete, and then they weathered it. They sprayed the entire base with a bit of grey and used some weathering soot for the cracks. Oh, no, don't go forward. I haven't finished reading that yet. 2 figurines they added to the model, and a toolbox and some stairs. And they're quite happy with how this one turned out. I think it should be. I think this is a good way of getting into a diorama. It gives you the basics of how to place things. Dioramas have certain or it's almost like you don't want anything to be like straight and level. Things have to be at angles to make them a little bit more visually interesting. So I think in your one at the moment, your aircraft is very straight along the lines. Maybe if you just angled it ever so slightly, it could just give a little bit more visual interest. But on the whole, I think you should be pretty proud of yourself, because this is a pretty nice looking diorama. So well done. Man's Models Moments has made a amusing hobby 1/35 scale object 640 Black Eagle. This was done out of the box, primed with Autotech matte black, and then sprayed in ICM rubber black, with different amounts of dark sea grey being added to modulate the paint finish. They added spatters of ICM browns and oil washes to represent a heavily used field trials vehicle, as it was a one-off prototype, wasn't used in combat. There is a bit of difference in tone. They say that they used the different settings on the camera, so the ones on the left may be true color, and then the one on the right isn't true color. So that might be explain why there's differences in tones. On the whole, though, if this is almost this is a prototype vehicle, I think you did a good job. It does look pretty weathered. It does look suitably dirtied up. Very nice build indeed. Shall we move on? We've got it's technically like an F-16, isn't it? But it's a KAIT 50 Golden Eagle from Academy in 1/72 scale. This is a Korean advanced jet trainer, but they've done it as a Polish FA-50 Fighting Eagle. So what you see at the top is how it comes out of the box. It's like almost like a snap together kit. You put your transfers on, and then they took that and transformed it into the Polish aircraft that you see the rest of the images. They say the plastic features excellent panel lines, rivets. There is some competitive cockpit detail. The only issue with the kit is that while designed exclusively as gears up in flight and including a display stand, the sprues don't have any pilot figures, and the large clear canopy shows the empty seats, which is a bit frustrating. It's great to have a flying model, but you need someone to be flying it. They decided to test how well it would go together and how convincing the final result would be if they didn't use any glue or paint, and on the whole they were pretty impressed with it. Parts went together smoothly, sat nice and snug, and the stickers, which were well cut, vibrant and good to adhere to the surface. And then they decided to peel off the stickers and paint it up into the Polish scheme that you have here to do something a little bit different with it. I think it looks good. What scale was it? 1/72. It's almost like a snap kit, almost like a beginner's kit, which you then went and further modified to enhance it, which I think you've done a good job of. It would be nice, I think, if they had included pilot figures, because it is a bit noticeable that there's no one flying the plane, which is a bit of a shame. Let's move on. This is a Hobby Boss 1/35 scale Jackal 2. It's done in a European green scheme, and you've got quite a few desert tan models already, so you wanted something a little bit different. They say the construction was okay, but almost all of the holes had to be enlarged to let the parts fit into them. Considering that they spent so much on the model, they say it was £70 at full price, but they got it with a bit of a discount. It was a bit disappointed that it didn't quite fit together as nicely as they would like. There was some photo etch, but they say they struggled a little bit with that, so they did leave some of it off, but I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know what you'd left off. I wouldn't be able to spot it. I do that sometimes myself. I leave off the bits I don't think people will notice. They say there was lots of bits for the suspension, which gives lots of detail, but they got a bit bored of it after a while. They're happy with the results, and they would like to have a go at a Jackal 1 and a Coyote in the future, if they could find them for a good price. I think you've done a good job. Looks all right. Looks pretty decent. Maybe the colours are a little bit flat, as we talked about earlier on. That little bit of extra sort of weight to the model could help, but on the whole, nice, clean looking build. So good job. Well done. Let's now look at this. This is a 1/72 scale KF21 Borome from Academy. So that translates to Fighting Hawk. This is the second prototype, number 2, which has the black and yellow colour scheme on the tail. The kit was originally designed as a snap fit and could be built with no glue or paint. And for this reason, including decals, the boxings are of a sticker type rather than a water slide transfer. So that's their only complaint about it. I probably wouldn't have noticed that they were stickers rather than transfers if you hadn't pointed that out. They say the kit is well designed. There were no gaps to fill. It's pretty cleverly engineered. Lots of nice little details. The snap fit nature of it really helped with dry fitting and final assembly. However, they say the very heavily simplified gear bays are questionable when we have proper intakes included. So they have proper intakes but then simplified landing gear bays. All of the minor gripes give the motivation to do some scratch building with extra details in the gear bays. They added some seat belts in the cockpit and also an aftermarket decal set with included masks. That'd be why then. That's why they're not stickers, because they are aftermarket decals. They did try some pre-shading as the plane is monotone, and obviously you've gone, yep, I don't want it just to be one colour, and you can tell that there's this extra weight that we talked about. That seems to be the theme of this one, this build today. There's a lot of grey planes. In conclusion, they say it was a nice build with an even nicer end result, which they're quite happy with. Yeah, you should be happy with that one. I think it's turned out nice. There is that extra weight to it, a little bit of subtle weathering, and nice clean build. Well done. Someday Models has sent in a Saab Viggen SK37 in 1/72 scale. This is the Revell release from the 2000s, but it was originally a Matchbox tool from the 70s. This is a Swedish Air Force supposed advanced trainer in the 1970s or 90s, but supposedly they put the wrong tail number on, so it doesn't quite represent the exact version that it should. They say the build went okay. The bit of the parts was okay, but not great. A bit of sanding was needed here and there to get rid of mold lines and those little circles from the ejector pins. Cockpit hasn't got much in the way of features. There are a couple of chairs, but they don't really fit anywhere, and they had to kind of figure out where to put them. The slightly unsymmetrical nose cone did not have any guides for correct placement, and that was a problem to get into place as well. So yeah, it sounds like there were a few problems with this particular build. They say the probe on the nose broke off at some point and vanished. The carpet monster ate it, so they had to make a replacement one to fix that. Yeah, do you know what? Despite the fact that this is an old tooling and it had its problems, if you hadn't told me that it had its problems, I probably wouldn't have known. You can see that there are panel lines. You've done a bit of modulation with the panels. There's different colours in there, which breaks up a otherwise monotone finish. I think that's a good job. I think you should be proud of what you've done despite the problems that you encountered. So yeah, well done. And this brings us on to our final submission from Fenris. This is the 1/35th scale Tyrannosaurus diorama set from Tamiya. They say the kit's a great build, just like all of the other dinosaur diorama sets from Tamiya. This one also has the baby Tyrannosaurus from Tamiya's Mesozoic Creatures pack. The biggest issue, though, with the build came not from the kit itself, but the products that were used. So they tried to do a few new things, such as adding snow effects from AK, which went on quite easily and conformed perfectly, but a problem arose when applying the water-based medium to the paper leaves. Yes, so we've got paper leaves for our plants and then a water-based like glue to stick down the snow. Some of the green dye from the paper plants leached into the white of the snow, which has made it go a slightly different colour. A little bit of airbrushing of white over the top could try and hide this, but I think next time they say they're going to try and solve it by putting the varnish on the plants first and then the snow. Otherwise, though, quite happy with the build. Turned out great. You were up against the clock, though, so you did have to do a little bit of rushing. And as a result, the dinosaurs weren't quite as detailed as you like. But I like this. You did a good job, Fenris. It's a really nice build. It's something a little bit different. Obviously fits within the theme fantastically. I think you did a very good job of it. I would probably like to have a go at the dinosaurs at some point in the future. But again, so many projects, so little time. And that, as they say, is that. So what did you think of those submissions? Do let the people know in the chat. I liked all of them. They were all fantastic. Obviously P40, no bias there, but yeah, no, they were all really good. I don't know if people do the P40s because they know that I like P40s, or if, you know, generally they just went, oh yeah, that's suitable. If you'd like to take part in the next group build, actually we currently have one. So if you're watching this around the time when this stream was created, we're doing one at the moment called Vintage. Vintage is based off of the theme of any tooling from before the 90s. It doesn't matter if it's a rebox or a re-release, just as long as the tooling is pre-90s and any parts in there are not like modified after that point. So no new parts after the 90s, but anything before the 90s is fair game. Link to that is in the description of the video, or stream, as this one actually is. We do tend to do group builds I think it's every 6 months really. Group builds tend to last for about 4 months, and then we have a little break, and then we have another one, and then we have a break, and then the streams are kind of the reward at the end of the day. So if you'd like to take part, do check out the Discord server below. As always, we do actually have a Model Minutes Model Club, and Model Minutes Model Club members get exclusive access to videos and other perks. And I'd like to thank these guys on screen for the extra support they give the channel, allowing me to create consistent content. Of course, if you would like to support the channel in other ways, again, full information is provided below the video. The best way, however, to support the channel for free is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you don't miss those modelling uploads. And that is pretty much it for today. It's been nice hanging out with you all. I've seen the chat as you've been talking. A lot of people saying lots of positive things about the builds, which is what we like to see. But for me here on the workbench today, the final thing to say is a massive thank you to you for joining me on this one, and I'll catch you all again next time.